Alan Parks como vendedor máximo de esta feria, porque es bien sabido que el señor Alan Parks, que hace todavía 3 años era razonablemente desconocido, pues de repente se ha convertido en una auténtica estrella del género negro, que seguramente ahora mismo es el género más seguido por parte de un mayor número de lectores. Hace 2 años tuvimos la oportunidad de encontrarnos con un libro titulado Enero Sangriento. Dijimos, Alan Parks, a ver, veamos, escocés, se ha dedicado al mundo de la música, ahora escribe novela, vamos a ver qué es esto, y nos encontramos con un personaje, Harry McCoy, que un día le llaman, bueno, en la primera página le llaman desde una cárcel para decirle que al día siguiente van a matar a alguien, y él se propone evitarlo y no puede evitarlo. Y no solo muere la persona que estaba señalada, sino que incluso el asesino se suicida. Bueno, aquí tenemos muchos elementos de lo que han hecho famosa la novela, digamos, criminal, ¿no? Incluso casi podíamos pensar en lo que se llama la novela enigma, pero rápidamente descubrimos que en el pasado del protagonista hay unas relaciones turbias, al mismo tiempo hay unos personajes secundarios que crean todo un ambiente en la comisaría donde trabajan, le han puesto un ayudante nuevo que es un poco novato y bastante torpe, y a partir de ahí nos vamos metiendo en una historia absorbente, rápida, dura. Yo creo que en Escocia en general y en Glasgow en particular hay algo en el aire que hace que los escritores se muestren particularmente duros a la hora de escribir, ¿no? Es lo que James Ellroy llamó el tartan noir, es decir, gente como Val McDermid o Denis Mina o Peter May, Ian Rankin o Graham McRae Barnett, autores que es verdad que de alguna manera tienen cierta relación con la novela negra europea, incluso con la nórdica, pero que tienen una peculiaridad, y es que parece que han vivido siempre en un territorio fronterizo, un poco sórdido y difícil, ¿no? Bueno, eso fue la primera novela y dijimos, está bien, ¿no? Una novela que aparecía en enero y se titulaba Enero Sangriento. Oye, al año siguiente apareció en febrero, Hijos de Febrero, y nuestro protagonista favorito ya se había convertido en eso, tiene que solucionar un asunto con un deportista asesinado, con un gángster que tiene una hija y un sicario que quizás es el que ha matado al tipo, y además de todo esto, el protagonista tiene un historial de maltratos y de abusos durante su infancia en un orfanato. ¡Wow! La cosa va subiendo y se va convirtiendo en algo apasionante. Y este año hemos tenido la tercera de la serie, que se titula Bobby March vivirá para siempre. Espero que hayan apreciado que en cada título hay el nombre de un mes. En este caso, además, es el apellido de este personaje, Bobby March, que es un músico que ha trabajado en el mundo donde nuestro invitado ha trabajado tanto tiempo y que conoce también. Y aquí pues la cosa se ha ido multiplicando y entonces ya tenemos crímenes para todos los gustos, historias relacionadas con el pasado, mucha música, muchos Rolling Stones y muchas cosas para disfrutar. Y esto hace que hoy Alan Parks esté aquí con nosotros, así que le agradecemos muchísimo que se haya llegado hasta Bilbao. Muchas gracias.
Oh, thank you for asking me. It's very grand circumstances.
Bueno, se me había apagado esto. Suele pasarme con los aparatos. Decía que has estado durante 20 años trabajando en el mundo de la música y de repente decidiste dedicarte a la literatura. ¿Era algo que tenías pensado anteriormente? ¿Era algo a lo que no te habías dedicado porque estabas ocupado con la música? ¿O era algo que de repente surgió en tu vida y te dedicaste a hacerlo?
No, I had no previous thoughts of doing it at all. I was happy in my job until everyone stopped buying CDs and I got made redundant like everyone else. And if it hadn't happened, I'd probably still be working at Warner Brothers and be quite happy. But then I had to find something else to do, and the job I had was quite specialised. It wasn't easy to move on to something else. I thought I'll try and do something that just relies on me. And the easiest thing that I could think of was writing. It was very self-contained and, you know, you could do it by yourself. So I just started writing just after I got made redundant. And that was the story, really.
¿Pero a qué te dedicabas exactamente en el mundo de la música?
I was called creative director. So basically I commissioned the artwork, the videos, the photographs, what the band looked like, what the sleeve looked like, what the videos looked like. I didn't have anything to do with the actual music, but how the band appeared and how they were marketed and that sort of thing, that's what I did. So it was a good job. I enjoyed it, yeah. It was a kind of like an art director kind of job, really.
Y se te quedó un poquito la historia de la música porque hay mucha música en tus novelas. Mencionas a montones de artistas y de gente que, bueno, como las novelas están ambientadas en 1973, a gente de aquel entonces, los Rolling Stones, Lulu, David Bowie, etcétera, etcétera.
Yeah, I think like a lot of people, if you grow up I grew up in a very sort of, in a village which was very quiet, and you know, in Britain they used to have the weekly music press. The NME would come out every Thursday, and this was like a portal into another world, you know. So for when I was like 13 or 14, I would just absorb all this stuff, and you know, it's obviously different now when you have the internet where everything comes, but you would read about some band or some artist or a band had mentioned or something in the paper. It took you like 3 weeks to track something down. You know, you go to various libraries and try and find things. But you know, music was a kind of way of getting into a lot of different cultural things, and I was always very, very keen on music, and when I left university, I went to work for a band manager, and then moved on to the record company. So yeah, I've always been very, very passionate about it, and it's all started, as it does with most things, with little 14, 13-year-old kids, you know, dreaming of a different world in a sort of bedroom in a village in Glasgow.
¿Y por qué situar tus novelas en 1973? ¿Te parece una época más rica, no sé si musicalmente, más rica en materia de delincuencia, más sórdida, más misteriosa, más violenta?
No, I think, you know, there's always good music. People, when they get to my age, get very snotty about, you know, oh, this new music's right. And it's you know, there's always good new music. It's just, it's not for you anymore. You're too old, you know, which is fine. It should be for young people. But 73 is really pretty simple. In 1973, I was 10. And I can remember quite well Glasgow at that time. I still do have a lot of cousins and aunts and uncles that live right in where the books are set in the north of Glasgow, and we used to go on Fridays and Saturdays to go and visit them, and you would come from a little village where nobody lived and it was really boring, and you'd go to this place where there's hundreds of kids running about, and there was dogs and ice cream vans and drunk people, and you know, it was all very exciting for me. And so I remember that time quite vividly, and it was a strange time. You know, half of Glasgow was being knocked down, demolished, and there was vast acres of kind of mud flats and, you know, new buildings coming up. So there was lots of weird places to play in, and Glasgow was, to me anyway, very exciting because you would see so many different kind of people. You know, you would see rich people, you would see poor people, you'd see sort of alcoholics, you'd see people on the street, you'd see very fashionable people, you'd see people that were a bit mad, and you know, so the change from sitting in a little bedroom in a village to seeing all this madness going on, it stayed with me a lot. So I think that's why I ended up writing about that particular time. And the music's pretty good as well.
Bueno, después del primer título la cosa ya empezó a funcionar y seguiste trabajando en ello. ¿Tenías un plan B en el caso de que no hubiera funcionado la primera novela?
No, I've never had a plan for anything, to be honest. I've always sort of wandered into things by accident. And I never thought I would write another book. But when you sign a book to a publisher, you have to sign to say you'll do 2 or 3. And it hadn't really crossed my mind. And I went there, and the publisher said, you know, so these further Harry McCoy books. And I was like, what? And he was like, well, you know, it'll be a series of books about Harry McCoy. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's what I was thinking of. It hadn't even crossed my mind. So I suddenly realised I had to keep writing. So that's how it happened. Like most things, you kind of fall into it. So you end up doing that, and then that kind of becomes your lane, and you end up as a crime writer suddenly, which is kind of weird.
Bueno, y el resultado está ahí para satisfacción de todos nosotros. Nero Sangriento es una novela que encuentra rápidamente a su público, escribes las siguientes novelas, vas incrementando los personajes, van creciendo las relaciones de Harry McCoy y también el pasado. ¿Tú tenías una idea clara de cómo era Harry McCoy en el momento de escribir la primera novela? Quiero decir, ¿tenías claro que había sufrido abusos en su infancia, que había estado en un orfanato? ¿O eso son cosas que después se van incorporando a la biografía del personaje?
Yeah. No, there were certain things I was pretty clear about when we started. I mean, they weren't all in the first book, but I knew he'd grown up in institutional care, and he had a friend who was the same, which is Stevie Cooper, who took a slightly different route in life. So I knew that, and I knew he was a slightly different kind of policeman because he was 30 in 1972 or 73, I can't remember now. Anyway, so he grew up in what was ostensibly the 60s, and so like any other 20-year-old guy in the 60s, you know, he would have taken drugs, he'd have got drunk, he'd have, you know, done all that stuff, been to concerts, and that was a kind of difference between him and the other policemen in Scotland in the 70s. The police was a very established organisation. It was very restricted and very, not entirely different from what it was in the 50s. It was very male, very discriminatory against minorities, very authoritarian. And he was a kind of a different breed. He sort of came from more the counterculture than anything else. And because of his background, he had more empathy for people that the police don't normally accommodate very much. So there was a couple of things I knew about him. So right at the beginning, I knew there was 4 or 5 kind of big factors in his life and what he'd be like. And then they sort of develop, as much to my surprise as knowledge, across the following books. So he always finding something else out about him.
Pero es sorprendente porque en el primero de los libros ya hay como muchos detalles que parecen indicar, bueno, en los que tú cuentas cómo era McCoy antes. O sea, casi el lector tiene la sensación de me he perdido una novela anterior. Y no, esa es la primera, ¿no? Pero hay un montón de detalles que tú vas dejando como diciendo, si este hombre tiene un pasado no solo como niño abusado y demás, sino también como policía. Ha intervenido en otros casos, ¿no?
Yeah, I think it's good to start in the middle because it's a bit more exciting when you start in the middle and you're sort of finding things out, and you kind of drop the reader in the middle of things and they're not too sure what's going on. And I think that's kind of better than Harry McCoy was born in, 1950, and sort of make it very spelled out. I think readers are cleverer than that. I think they enjoy discovering things kind of for themselves. So, we sort of dropped him straight into prison in the first book and then into a shooting, and you kind of learn about Harry as the book goes on. I think at the beginning you just think he's a kind of normal policeman, and by the end maybe your thoughts are a bit different. So I just wanted to get to the interesting bits as quickly as possible. So, and as I said, I like books where you kind of what's happening? You sort of enjoy being a little bit puzzled or what's going on, and I think that's more interesting for the reader than a kind of more laid out explanation of what's going to happen and who he is and where he came from and that sort of thing. So, I think I can't even remember who said the quote. It was like some author was like, "Drop all the Charles Dickens shit. Don't do all the backstory at the beginning." So that's always the plan.
Pero es muy curioso porque, por ejemplo, este policía no tiene demasiados roces con sus compañeros, no tiene un jefe que le perjudique, no es un mal jefe. Bueno, a partir de la tercera novela sí, pero Murray al principio pues es un tipo estupendo, el ayudante que le ponen no es especialmente torpe, es casi un policía raro dentro de la novela negra.
Yeah, that's because I'm very lazy and I have done zero research into the structure of the police in the 70s. I have a friend, Liam McIlvanney, who also writes books set exactly the same time in Glasgow. And if you read his books, you see how bad I am, because they are incredibly detailed about, you know, the structure of police and murder rooms and the CID and who did what, and I don't have any of it. And I was having dinner with him one night, and he said to me, so Alan, how many policemen, you know, of the time did you interview before you started the book? And I was too embarrassed to say none. So I said 2, thinking that sounded quite good. And he said, oh yeah, I spoke to 8 or 9. I was like, oh my God. But the thing is, if you read his books, you will see he's done that. And I very much haven't. Because I based my knowledge of the police on TV programmes. And as far as I could see, they had this boss. Then there was someone who was lower than them. And he was the kind of middle one. And that was really all you need to know, I thought. But so that's why he doesn't have much to do with the police organisations, because I don't know how to do it. He's a bit, in a weird way, he's slightly more like a private eye than a policeman. He's fairly independent, and I'm sure if in the real world he'd be in big trouble for just wandering off and doing everything himself, but it makes it kind of more fun to write. So, plus I think, you know, people understand, you know, he's got a boss and someone like, that's kind of all you need to know. You don't really need to know that his second lieutenant, you know, works in the CID room in Paisley Road, you know, this stuff. Although Liam does it really well, but it's just not, for me, the interesting thing. You know, research is research. You sort of do the research, then forget about it, then write the book. Don't put the research in the book, you know, so that's my excuse anyway.
Lo que pasa es que cada vez hay más investigaciones en tus novelas. Perdóname, empezaron con la historia aquella de la mujer asesinada y el suicidio del asesino, que al mismo tiempo lleva a una investigación en las altas esferas de la ciudad. Luego, en la segunda parte, tenemos a un futbolista asesinado y las historias del orfanato. Pero en la tercera ya tenemos a una niña desaparecida, a una joven desaparecida, tenemos a Bobby March que aparece muerto, tenemos unos asaltantes de bancos, tenemos hasta el IRA en Irlanda. ¿Todo esto te va creciendo conforme escribes la novela o tienes una idea férrea al principio y dices, no, voy a meter todo esto, o después te lo inventas?
It's a little bit of half and half. There's a lot of research into things that aren't the police. The police are the only thing I never research, which is probably my fault. But I've got an idea, sort of, what's going to happen. You know, sometimes it's a certain place or, you know, a certain character. But what happens is when you start to write it, I always think, if I'm bored of this person, everyone else is going to be bored. And sometimes the person you thought was going to, you know, the story was going to turn on, they were going to be a very important character, suddenly you're like, ooh. And this little character sort of appears out of nowhere that was supposed to just be a bystander and suddenly becomes part of the thing. And often, you know, the books try to reflect as closely as possible reality in Glasgow at the time. So I was doing my research, not on the police. So there was a book, the fourth book, which is not out here yet, a man had been killed in a road in Shettleston. So I went to look at the road, you know, oh, this is where he'd be killed, this is where he lives in the flat, blah, 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 blah. And then across the road there was a pub called the Edrum. And I thought, well, he'd probably go, that would be his local pub, maybe he went there the night before. So the pub was closed, but I started talking to people, and I found out that the Edrum was one of only 2 pubs in Glasgow that was sympathetic to travelling people, to what I suppose you would call at that point gypsies, or, you know, show people. And there was only 2 pubs that would really let them in and treat them well. And so I thought, well, that's quite interesting. So that became a big strain in the book that was not supposed to be there. So I quite like when little things you sort of discover, you know, by walking about or talking to people, become part of the book. So I've never quite got it all planned out in my head, because I like to get U-turns or get a bit of a sideswipe sometimes. So it kind of keeps it interesting, and, you know, it's good to be able to accommodate that and not go, oh no, I've already decided what's going to happen, you know, so that's the way.
Lo que seguramente es más personal, por supuesto, es la postura moral de los personajes, ¿no? Tenemos al protagonista, que es un policía que tiene que cumplir con su trabajo, pero que tiene una actitud relajada con respecto a su amigo Cooper, por ejemplo, que es un delincuente, que es un poco salvaje. El mismo Cooper es un personaje que cae muy bien a los lectores, porque, bueno, pues tiene mucho encanto y, bueno, pues todos querríamos ser un poco Cooper. Y está la relación con las clases altas de la ciudad. Es un personaje que cumple muy bien con el principio de la novela negra acerca de qué es el bien, qué es el mal, dónde está la frontera entre las cosas y cómo tenemos que comportarnos. Igual, ahí McCoy es un poco Alan.
Oof, God, I don't know about that. I'm too scared. If I saw Cooper, I'd run a mile, to be honest. But no, I think what the idea with Stevie Cooper was that he had gone through the same experiences as McCoy, but he did a completely different reaction. McCoy worries about it all the time, thinks about it all the time, can't leave it alone, whereas Cooper's, poof, it's done, we're moving on. And, you know, his attitude's completely different. But they're both sort of tied to each other by what happened to them in the past. So even though they're completely different people, and one's a policeman and one's a gangland, you know, thug, for want of a better word, they are the people who know each other the best, you know, because they've had absent families and so on. So they're kind of tied together whether they like it or not. And I think, you know, sometimes McCoy uses Cooper to do his dirty work sometimes. If he feels that justice, as he sees it, has not been done by the system, sometimes he gets Cooper to give it a little bit of a a little bit of a help in a completely illegal way. So I think Harry McCoy has got a very clear idea of morality, and his morality is that having been abused by a system when he grew up, his sympathy is with people who he feels are being abused by systems now. So the people the police don't really speak to, the homeless people, or the people with mental health problems, or people who are very poor, you know, he's more concerned with them than perhaps he should be. And, you know, that's the people he thinks the police are there to defend, rather than the establishment that most of the police think they're there to keep the status quo. So he has a moral idea, and Stevie Cooper sometimes helps him out with that.
Bueno, yo me he situado muy bien en el año 73, que es cuando ocurren las tres novelas, porque más allá de que no haya teléfonos móviles y cosas por el estilo, pues no hay una diferencia clave con los tiempos actuales. Pero en la tercera, de repente, sí he tenido ese viaje al pasado por dos motivos fundamentales. Uno de ellos es cuando el protagonista va a Irlanda, que la situación en el Ulster es muy diferente en 1973 de la de ahora mismo. Y la segunda cuestión es que Bobby March estuvo tocando la guitarra con los Rolling Stones cuando murió Brian Jones. Son dos detalles que directamente te llevan a ese pasado. Bueno, lo de Brian Jones, eso es del 69, pero Bobby March muere en el 73, ¿no?
Yes, it does. It's a funny one. It's Belfast. Weirdly, is the city I probably go to after Glasgow. That's the city I'm in most, and it's funny. You forget how much residual knowledge of your own city you have. You know, if Bilbao, you would all the stuff you know about Bilbao, you don't really think about because it's all there. But if I said to you, where would a 40-year-old affluent doctor live in Bilbao, you would be able to tell me. I'd say, what kind of restaurant would he go to? You know, because you just kind of know these things. And I went to Belfast just to double check, and I suddenly realised I didn't know anything about it. You know, you don't have that deep background knowledge, so I had to check everything in Belfast. Even though I sort of knew, you have to double check because it doesn't come as naturally. So that was research there. And the thing with Rolling Stones is never, ever, ever write anything about the Rolling Stones, because people that like the Rolling Stones, and especially Rolling Stones bootlegs, are absolutely fanatical. And if you enter that world, it's like, my God, you know, it's like madness. So you have to get everything exactly right, or you will get 1,000 emails going, You know, they did not use an E string on, you know, Sympathy for the Devil. You have got that wrong. You're like, oh my God. So, you know, it's quite a difficult one. So you have to be very careful. Plus, amazingly, stupidly of myself, having worked in the music industry for 20 years, didn't realise you had to pay to quote lyrics in books. So I was a great Rolling Stones. I was I was all the way through it, you know, these quotes that sort of illustrated the thing. And then the publisher said, well, you have to pay £500 a quote. And I was like, oh my God. So this book's going to cost me more than I'm going to earn from it. So I didn't really realise that. So that's another weird one. But yeah, it's kind of interesting researching those things, because you do meet people who are really fanatical, you know, and it's kind of interesting. So, and yeah, Belfast, weirdly Belfast during the Troubles, which is about 26 miles away, you know, across the water. It's not far at all. You really didn't hear much about it in mainstream Britain. It was kind of partitioned off, and it's kind of amazing now that you think in 1973, you know, there's bombs going off in London, there's basically a civil war in Ireland, and you didn't really know that much about it. It's very odd. So, and another thing about research is, when you go to Belfast, normally when you look at old newspapers, they're on a sort of microfiche, it's like a film tape thing, and you put it through a machine. In Belfast, it's still the actual papers. So you get these enormous books full of the newspaper, and what happens is people cut bits out. They sort of go along and they go, oh, that's quite interesting. Oh, that was, you know, when my dad was born, I'll just take that. Yeah, so it's got big holes all the way through it. So it's quite, it's a bit difficult. Oh, this is exactly the bit I need. And you're like, hang on, it's been cut out by somebody. So yeah, it's not the easiest thing to research, but there you go.
Sí, era una etapa bastante turbulenta, los 4 de Guildford y cosas por el estilo. Pero bueno, dejando ese tipo de cosas, es en Belfast cuando hemos visto a McCoy como más humano, ¿no? Más humano en el sentido de que tiene miedo. De hecho, tiene una experiencia muy traumática diciendo, aquí me liquidan. Él que ya estaba en un territorio más o menos seguro en su Glasgow, tranquilo, de repente aparece en Belfast y dice, cuidado que aquí me la estoy jugando, ¿no? Eso yo creo que le da una dimensión diferente al personaje, ¿no? Le hace más humano. Y dice, mira, pues como cualquiera en esta circunstancia, ¿no?
Yeah, I think he thought he was being a bit of a smarty pants who would go over to Belfast and sort everything out, and that doesn't really happen. And, you know, the reality of police officers being killed in Scotland at that time was minimal. It was maybe like 1 or 2 a year. It was extremely rare. Whereas there, the RUC, you know, that was a real possibility. And he suddenly realises that to the people he's dealing with, he's just another policeman, that they wouldn't be that horrified to do away with. So he gets a real fright, and it kind of sobers him up quite a lot. And but yeah, he's a fish out of water. He suddenly doesn't know everything. You know, he doesn't know who everybody is. He doesn't know how to play everything, and it kind of comes back and bites him quite badly. So.
Oye, ¿cómo haces las historias? Quiero decir que da la sensación de que están pensadas detalladamente desde el principio. En este Bobby March vivirá para siempre, pues nadie piensa cuando desaparece esa jovencita de 13 años que la solución es la que vas a dar. Es decir, seguro que la tenías pensada. ¿Tú tienes las novelas ya pensadas de arriba a abajo o te sorprendes a ti mismo conforme las escribes?
I surprise myself. I mean, apparently I do it quite a strange way. I start books visually. I get pictures of different things. Some of them of Glasgow, some of them have nothing to do with Glasgow. And I put them all in a book, a big book, so I have a kind of mood sort of thing for the book. And I also go to places in Glasgow and decide I want to put that in the book. And sometimes there's an easy way to get it in the book, and sometimes it's a real struggle, and sometimes that's quite good because you have to work in your brain to get it to work. So I start off with a lot of kind of odd visual material, and that sort of starts your brain thinking, and some of it doesn't come through to the book, but it all kind of adds. And you know, the first book, the Bloody January book, I've got a big book, and it's basically like the whole story in pictures. So, you know, you have a picture of the special unit, you have a picture, you know, you could kind of almost look at it like that. And I think it works two ways. It's good to actually see what the things were like so you could describe them, you know, accurately. And also, it's good to, for atmosphere, you get a sort of, you know, it helps you get a bit more looser about what you're doing, and you know, have stuff in there that's really not entirely connected, but it's maybe the way someone looks or an expression on someone's face or something. You think that could be good to get in there. So it's half real things that are going to be in, you know, places and situations, and half sort of evocative things. And that's kind of how it starts. And then once I've got all that, then I sort of start the actual writing. So there's a couple of months of trying to work out what's actually going on and collecting this stuff, and then you start the actual beginning. And it comes from different... Bobby March was... how that started really was in Britain in the 70s, there was a spray paint campaign to get a criminal called Georgie Davis out of prison. And on the walls it said, "Georgie Davis is innocent." And this was sprayed and all sorts of... And when you look at 70s pictures, you sort of see it in the background sometimes. And I was like, oh, that's a bit weird. And I thought, well, then people used to spray paint Eric Clapton as God. I mean, obviously completely deluded. But and then I thought what was quite good if Bobby March will live forever was that thing. So these little things, you know, they build up that way. So that's kind of how you get to them, I think.
Bueno, la fórmula funciona, está claro.
Yeah, sometimes I say this at writers' things, and people just look at me like, what? You know, you stick bits of pictures in a book, but I suppose everyone does it a different way. Some people plan the whole thing, or they have index cards and they stick them up and move them about and all. So, you know, it's just different ways of doing it, really. So, whatever works for yourself, I think.
Hay poco fútbol en tus novelas. Es verdad que en la segunda novela parece muerto un futbolista, pero hay poco fútbol, y yo creía que siendo tan aficionados como soy los escoceses al fútbol, habría más fútbol. ¿A ti no te gusta el fútbol?
Yeah, the problem is I don't know anything about football whatsoever. I support a team more by sort of tribal inheritance than anything else. And when I was younger, my cousins used to hit me until I said I supported Celtic. They used to batter me. Go, what team do you support? I don't know. Celtic, okay. So I used to get that a lot. So you have to support Celtic or Rangers, really. So but I don't know very much about it. But my cousin is fanatical Celtic fan. I mean, nutty. And he said to me, put me in your book, put my name in your book. And I said, well, there's a Celtic guy. That's it. I want to be the Celtic player. That would be brilliant. That's amazing. He was slightly annoyed when his name, Peter Simpson, the Celtic player, was a bit of a failure who never made the first team, so he was not very happy about that. But football is a big thing in Glasgow, but it's got two aspects. There's a sectarian aspect of a Catholic and a Protestant thing, which I can kind of write about, but the actual mechanics of good and bad footballers, I'm not very good at all, so it probably comes in a little bit less than it should, but that's me. I can't really do it.
¿No será que no quieres tener problemas en Glasgow entre los de un equipo y de otro?
Well, see, there's always the coward's way out in Glasgow where you support Partick Thistle, so I could do that. But no, I don't mind it. It's just I'm not very good at writing about football. It's you know, it's not the best. I like the kind of aftermath of it and what happens, but the actual football I'm not so good at.
Bueno. No te lo tendremos en cuenta.
Sadly, I went to posh school, so I played rugby.
Bueno, el deporte de caballeros. Lo que tiene es un buen hígado, McCoy, porque bebe y vuelve a beber y se va a tomar unas pintas y luego tiene una cita y se bebe un par de botellas de vino y todavía se va al pub a seguir bebiendo y sin aparentes consecuencias. No sé si tienes tu experiencia en el tema.
Unfortunately, I'm a rubbish drinker. I'd be in bed by about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I think. But you kind of forget, at that point, people drank during the day in Scotland. You know, at lunchtime, they would go for a pint and things, and, you know, they would go straight from the work to the pub, and it was just such a big part of it. And, you know, they just did. I mean, I don't know if they were half drunk half the time, or whether they were just better drinkers than I am, but that really was the culture, that men just kind of drank all the time, really. And it's kind of weird now, because everyone's so, you know, health conscious, but, you know, they used to go to the pub at lunchtime with a pie, you know, and a pint for their lunch, and go back to operating heavy machinery rather frighteningly. So it's not something I can do, but it still happens a lot in Glasgow, as I'm sure it does here, to be fair. You know, it's you know, you see people drinking during...
Poquito.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. The only time I really drink is in airport lounges, because I'm so scared of flying, so there's always pictures of me at 7 in the morning drinking, because I'm about to get on a plane, but other than that, it's night time for me.
Bueno, también forma un poco parte de la idea que tenemos del detective de novela negra, ¿no? Es fumador, es bebedor, liga lo que puede, fracasa casi siempre. Estamos acostumbrados a esta imagen, ¿no? Un poco Humphrey Bogart y demás.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of cliches in detective books, and I tried to get every single one in because I quite like them. So he drinks too much, he smokes all the time. Mysteriously, he's desperately attractive to every woman who crosses his path. You know, I like he's got a partner. You know, I kind of like all the cliches of detective writing, and I kind of like putting them in, and I think people quite like them. You know, you kind of know where you are. So he's got a boss he doesn't get on with. You know, I could list there's 50 bloody cliches, but I think as long as you do them in a slightly clever, slightly ironic way, that you know you're not the first person that's written someone like this, you know, and you won't be the last. It's quite good fun, I think. I quite like them. So yeah, so he's got an assistant. And I kind of found out why all detectives have an assistant when I started writing them, because he's there to ask the stupid questions that the reader wants to ask. So if they go to a crime scene, Watty, the kind of slightly, you know, young and impressionable, was like, why is there blood over there? And McCoy goes, well, there's blood over there because. So you can kind of use Watty to ask the questions that you want to explain to the reader without McCoy having to say them. So he's got, and he's someone to talk to in the car. He's like, oh, do you think Ian McPherson did the bank robbery, Watty? Watty goes, oh, I don't know, maybe it was Joe Schmo. So he's quite good technically to have someone for him to talk to. So that's why they all have assistants. And I'm not entirely sure why they're all so mysteriously attractive to women, but they all are.
Ya. Tenemos a un detective que se marea cuando ve la sangre. Eso es como un médico hipocondríaco. Es una cosa muy rara. ¿Qué hace metido en esto, McCoy?
Yeah, it was one of the things I thought at the beginning. I thought he'd be terrified. I mean, there's a reason he's terrified of blood, but that's a whole backstory. But I quite like the idea that when he got to a crime scene, he was just like, oh, God, no. You know, instead of this sort of very bold, I'll see what's going on, he'd be standing at the back going, I don't want to look, you know. So I thought that was quite funny. So he's not very good with blood and guts at all, which I'm sure some policemen aren't. I mean, I don't think I'd be very good with blood and guts, you know. So he tends to try and stay away with it. And now his assistant Watty has sort of realised this and sort of teases him the whole time and come over here and look at this. He's like, oh God, you know. So yeah, he's not good with blood. It makes him ill. And apparently he throws up a lot. The editor keeps telling me this is the 4th time in this book McCoy's thrown up. I thought, oh, sorry. He's always throwing up and bursting into tears. So it's he's not the most macho of detectives.
¿No será que el autor dice, así tengo una disculpa para poner crímenes especialmente sangrientos?
Well, I think most crimes are bloody, to be honest, or the remnants of them are. And, you know, people forget, in Glasgow, it was when people attacked each other, it was physical, and it was with knives and fists, you know, it wasn't like guns or that sort of thing. So they really, had to go each other hard, you know, that's kind of the only way you could get the other person. And also, you know, Stevie Cooper runs a money lending business, and, you know, if you borrow money, you don't pay it back, you physically pay the price. And the terrible thing is, at that point, you know, these people are not borrowing, they're borrowing like £6, you know, they're really borrowing tiny amounts to try and get through the week. And of course, if you borrow £6, by the end of the week, if you haven't paid it back, it's £12. And then the next week, it's £24. And you're forever in you know, you can never get away. And that's how it works. So, and to enforce that horrendous rise in interest, you know, they would go and slash people at their door for £4, you know. So, and that money lending is a very pernicious thing. And it still happens today that people, and it happens with legal lending, you know, these terrible companies that go on TV and say, do you need £100 this week? And people that need £100 immediately with no credit history are not going to be that concerned about the mechanics of it till they find out they owe £240 the next week, you know. And it's legalised, you know, as bad as it was in the 70s, so it still goes on. When people are desperate, they will have to have the money, you know, whether it's for their kids' Christmas or whether it's for whatever, you know, and the consequences we'll worry about another day. So, yeah, the violence is kind of there. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of just violence for the sake of it. It has to have some sort of reason, and, you know, hopefully the books aren't just gratuitous, you know, blood and guts, but Stevie Cooper, that's his job, you know, that's what he does. He hurts people, so you kind of have to put it in, or else he wouldn't be very good at his job, so...
Bueno, pero lo cierto es que el amigo Cooper acaba ganándose el corazoncito del lector, porque a pesar de sus métodos poco ortodoxos, lo cierto es que, bueno, tiene una justificación ante el lector, ¿no?
Yeah, I think people like the fact he just does not give a shit about anything. You know, he just does what he does, and I think people would quite like that. They think, well, that must be quite good. And, you know, but you can't, I mean, he has his good points. People are not evil or good, you know. Stevie Cooper is probably a really good guy to go out for a drink with. He's probably really good fun, but you don't want to get on the wrong side of him. You know, so people are people, and then they have a job. So he's a person, and his job is to hurt people. But that doesn't mean that's all he does, you know. So I think Stevie Cooper, if he's not coming after you, is probably quite a fun guy to go out with. So, you know, I kind of know why people find him interesting. And people, and he is an interesting character. People that do bad things are interesting characters because they're not the normal person. It doesn't really matter what odd thing it is they do, as long as you don't do what everyone else does, they become more interesting, you know. So they become like the sort of celebrities in their area that everyone knows who they are, and people tell stories about them, and, you know, they become notorious, I suppose, for want of a better word. But it's above. It's coming, his head's above the parapet, he's a big man. And people that are like that have very big, strong personalities. They're not, you know, little, like me, little people that sit and write in books. You know, they're big, gregarious, you know, strong-minded people. They kind of have to be to do their job. So they're kind of attractive to be around, I think.
Bueno, si ustedes ven, tienen el libro ahí fuera, el último, el tercero, pero tienen también en las librerías el primero y el segundo de la serie de McCoy, verán que la fecha de publicación original es 2020. Han pasado 2 años. En este tiempo, nuestro invitado ha tenido ocasión de publicar ya 2 novelas más. ¿Cómo te sientes ahora hablando tanto del pasado y sin poder adelantar nada de lo que es la 4ª y la 5ª novela?
I'm happy, but the terrible thing is I have a really, really bad memory, and I can't remember what happens in the book. And luckily, we came to Spain, to Barcelona a couple of months ago, and I had no idea. I was so stupid. I thought they'd be talking about the new book. And the journalist was like, so Bobby March? I was like, I cannot remember a bloody thing that happens in that book. And luckily, the translator had just read it. And I was like, what happens then? Who's that? You know, so I'm really bad. And because books get published in different countries at different times, I'm always like, which book is it today? Which book is it? But yeah, and my memory's terrible as well. It's funny because, you know, I like talking about, I'm saying the old books, I mean, that's dirty, but the new ones, yeah, it'd be nice to talk about them, but they're obviously not out yet. There's another two, there's, I don't know what they'll be called here, they always change the title somewhat. It's called, it's The April Dead in thingy, in Britain, and then the next one is called May God Forgive, but I have no idea what they'll end up being here. May God Forgive is a difficult one because, you know, they're named after months, but May in that context is not a month, it's a verb. Is it a verb?
Sí.
Yeah. Anyway, so it'll be called something completely different. But it's always nice to talk about any of the books, and if people have read them, it's always nice to talk to them about them, I think. So, but yeah, my memory is not great. I keep saying things like the baddie, because I can't remember them, which is not ideal, but yeah.
Por cierto, que este método te obliga a publicar cada 13 meses, porque enero, febrero del año siguiente, marzo del siguiente, abril del siguiente. O sea, tú tienes una cadencia de publicación de 13 meses, ¿no? ¿O no la cumples?
You're probably right, but I'm completely confused. I don't know. I just hand them in and go, they decide when they come out. It's not up to me when they appear, if you know what I mean. But it's kind of one a year, pretty much, which is... So you get like 2 months off when you finish one, before you have to start the next one, so it kind of goes around. But yeah, pretty much one a year, so it takes about 9-10 months to write one. Or 9 months, then it goes, and then the editor comes back, and then the copy editor comes back, they go change this, blah, 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 blah. So you have a bit of faffing about at the end, but generally it takes about 10 months, yeah. It would probably take a lot shorter if I actually just sat down and did it every day, instead of wandering about, sticking pictures into books and wandering about pubs, but... There you go.
Pero, bueno, los 3 primeros libros ocurren en 1973, pero ya abril ya será el 74, ¿no?
Working?
¿Escuchabas?
I think it is. I don't know. I can't remember. I think it's 74. Yeah, it's 74.
74.
I think 74.
74. Yeah. Y luego mayo ya veremos para dónde. Ya veremos para dónde
van las
cosas.
It's round about then. Sometime in the early 70s.
Lo que seguro es que vamos a seguir teniendo a McCoy durante al menos 12 novelas, ¿no? Una por cada mes.
Hopefully, if people keep buying them, yeah, hopefully we will do 12. And what happens then is you probably get to about 81, 82, 1981, 92, and that's when Glasgow starts to change. It becomes, as Bilbao did, it reinvents itself as a more modern city, as a city that doesn't rely on old industries like shipbuilding and whatever, which is great for the city, but not so great for me to write about. Plus, what happens in the early 80s is you get a lot of drugs in Glasgow, and the criminals essentially become drug dealers more than anything else, which is not quite so much fun to write because they don't really come in contact with people. They sit in their houses doing coke and, you know, ordering couriers from Amsterdam. It's kind of a different thing, really, and it's interesting, but it's just not my kind of bit I like. So I think what the crime in Glasgow is and what McCoy would have to deal with would start to change by 82, 83, and that might be time for him to bow out a bit. But we'll see.
Bueno, eso es muy en el futuro. Yo no sé si algunos de los presentes tiene intención de preguntar algo a nuestro invitado. Suele haber unos micrófonos que no sé si... Lo hay. Si alguien tiene intención de preguntar algo, creo que es el momento de que debe levantar la mano.
No.
Porque desde aquí lo vemos. Pero si se van a limitar simplemente a hacerse con el libro y a que se lo firmen, podemos dejarlo aquí. Muchísimas gracias a todos por venir. Ha sido un placer compartir con ustedes este rato.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you. Thank you for coming along. It's very kind. Thank you. And I take this off now.
Lo dejamos aquí.
Oh.